Hey friends, welcome back to another weekly wrap-up of Peace and Power's Bible study, the peace of Jesus Christ to change your life, the power of God to change the world. And as we continue our study through the book of Ruth, we're on our fourth week of these lessons, and we're going to be looking at chapter 3. We're going to be studying the book of Ruth. And through studying the book of Ruth, we're going to be learning how to study Scripture in general. Now, just to get our bearings, here is sort of the outline we've been working through. First week, we actually looked at the introduction and the conclusion, which is a genealogy. Second week, we looked at chapter 1, the rest of chapter 1, which is the journey from Moab back to Bethlehem in Israel. Third week, last week, we just looked at the harvest and chapter 2. This week, we're going to concentrate a lot on chapter 3, which is called the proposal. And in chapter 3, it breaks down a lot like chapter 2. There's a little short section in verses 1 through 5 with Naomi and Ruth having a conversation off by themselves that sets the stage for the rest of the chapter. The main action of the chapter happens in the middle and can be divided into two parts. And then the last couple verses of the chapter have kind of a recap, another discussion between Naomi and Ruth. So that's just the breakdown, and it's very similar to chapter 2. But before we get started in chapter 3, we're going to look at the last verse of chapter 2. So chapter 2, verse 23 says, Ruth stayed close to Boaz's young woman and gathered grain until the barley and wheat harvests were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Now, when we look at that, when we see that verse right there, we may, being removed from it for several centuries, even millennia, we may not realize that that verse is indicating that there are 6 or 7 weeks that go from chapter 1 to chapter 3. There's a long amount of time interval that is in between, and between the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3 is about 6 or 7 weeks. During the 6 or 7 weeks, I believe the author is creating what would be called a literary tension. There's a dramatic pause, as I've entitled it, and each one of our characters is in somewhat of a decision-making process in the story. So we see that Naomi is still in conflict with God, but at the end of chapter 2, there have been signs that that conflict is softening. Now, Ruth has been throughout consistently showing faithful love to Naomi. This word hesed, which was the homework from last week. But as the author reminds us 4 times in chapter 2, she was a Moabitess, and faithful love and Moabites really didn't go well together in the Israelite mind. And then Boaz has been the epitome of the kinsman redeemer, this good and upstanding example of who an Israelite should be. But this was the time of the judges, and nobody was really good. Everybody was doing what they seemed was best. And this character of Boaz seems very, very starkly contrasted to any and all of the characters in the book of Judges, or the readers would have had at the time of the Judges in their mind. Boaz, was he too good to be true? So we're paused here, and we wonder which one of these with each of the characters will prove to be the way things are, this dramatic pause. So in the first couple verses of chapter 3, Naomi comes up with a plan. And let me just read these verses for you real quick. Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I find security for you, so that you will be taken care of? Now, isn't Boaz our relative? Haven't you been working with his young women? This evening he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfumed oil, wear your best clothes, go down to the threshing floor. But don't let the man know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he is lying. Go in and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will explain to you what you should do. So Ruth said to her, I will do everything you say. We're going to pause there. So in these 5 verses, it seems that Naomi takes matters into her own hands and comes up with this plan. The plan is for Ruth to wash, perfume, dress nicely. And it's interesting to note, and there's some discussion whether that dress nicely is what that's talking about. Some of the commentators have indicated it might be change out of your widow's clothes and put on regular clothes, signifying that you are no longer in mourning. That was one commentator's interpretation of that dress nicely. And then part of Naomi's plan is for Ruth to go and visit Boaz at night in secret and do what Boaz says. That's the setup for this. And we can see, hopefully, we can see that there might be some problems in this plan. But every Israelite reader up to this point would, like, alarms would be going off in their heads at this reading of it. This author of Ruth is creating this literary tension that is just thick. Let me point out some of the problems in this plan, some of the problems that might come up with things that are going on. Based on what we know about the characters, it could be that Naomi has given up on God and is trying to provide for her daughter-in-law through ungodly means. This sounds a lot like Elimelech in the very first chapter. There was a famine in the land of Israel, so Elimelech left Israel, which he shouldn't have done, and went to Moab to find food. This was not what God intended the Israelites to do. Naomi is here putting her daughter-in-law in a risky situation in order to provide for her, because she is no longer ready to wait for God's timing and provision. This seems to look like Naomi is going back to what she had previously thought, and her conflict with God is not getting any better. Then we see Ruth the Moabitess. Will she show her true nature and sexually entrap this godly Israelite man? Is that what's going on here? Will Ruth truly appear to be the Moabitess? Or, on the other hand, this vulnerable single widow is going to be alone at night with Boaz. Is Boaz too good to be true? And will he take advantage of the vulnerable widow? These are all 3 possibilities to this plan. These are all 3 things that could happen. And the reader is, if they were sitting down, or the listener, is on the edge of their seats in this story. This is drama. What is going to happen here? The interesting thing, any of what actually does happen, which we will look at in the next session, is even more shocking than any of the possibilities the reader could have imagined. This is a good story. I hope you're excited to try to figure out what happens as I am. Okay, so as always, thanks for joining. There are a couple ways to connect. We do this Bible study live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time via Zoom. Hit me up for all that information, and then continuing with these weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and WordPress. Find us on social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, WordPress, YouTube. All the links to those places are in the descriptions below. Hey, it was fun hanging out with you. Hope to see you again real soon.